Good afternoon, everybody, or anybody listening. Today, I am hoping to try and continue what I kind of started months and months ago with a thing called the Things I Like podcast. But I actually planned a few episodes. I actually have like three planned. Count them, three. And I'm gonna also rename it to Nerdcast instead of the Things I Like podcast because I think Nerdcast rolls off the tongue better. And we're going to be talking about nerdy stuff a lot of the time. Not always, but a lot of the time. So I think it's a more fitting name. Anyway, today, we're going to be talking about the Souls series, the Soulsborne series, the Dark Souls saga plus Bloodborne, however you want to refer to it. And oh my god, let's just get right into it. There have been a few games or series of games that I've ever played that have actually managed to shake me up, like almost to the soul, as far as, gaming experiences go. I've never played a game that's felt, or a series of games that has felt deeper and dripping with more atmosphere and really made you feel like what you were doing mattered to some degree. But at the same time, you didn't always know what you were doing, which kind of adds to the mystery of it, and it also added to the determination of you wanting to figure out what it was you were doing. So I usually don't like, action without vision, but sometimes doing what you're doing to figure out what you're doing is just mwah, so good. So good. Also, in case you haven't realized this already, this isn't really a watching video. There will be some footage in the background, but just tab out and listen, and you'll, mission accomplished. But anyway, back to the good stuff. One of the first big things about the game itself is that, like, from a mechanical perspective, is the world is amazing. It's just so satisfying to go through and to conquer and to explore and to discover new things in, and it's amazing. Like, I don't even know how to put it into too many other words, but it's fucking amazing. Like, when you play Dark Souls 1 for the first time and you do the tutorial area, which is very well done, by the way. You can R1 spam, harmless enemies, or you can just throw firebombs at the Asylum Demon and be done in 2 minutes. But that tutorial is going to work for any kind of gamer out there, no matter who you are, and it'll fulfill its purpose. If you need it, you can take time there. If you don't need it, you can be done in 2 minutes. And then the Crow, who's something to be Velka, but that's speculation for another day. The Crow then takes you to Firelink Shrine, and from there, you're not really sure where to go. I mean, it kind of becomes obvious a little bit later. Like, I've seen people in other playthroughs kind of, they can judge by the enemies that they're fighting that they're in the wrong place. Like, typically, a lot of people go to the graveyard first, and you get completely ass blasted by those freaking skeletons. And the only time you should be going there at the beginning of the game is if you're going there on purpose to dash through and pick up the Zweihander and then run away. Because if you're going for a base cannon build where you're just piling a bunch of the strength for the Zweihander, then yeah, run through the graveyard and go get it. But other than that, you do not want to start off the game progressing through the graveyard. That's just a horrible idea, and it teaches you that because the skellies take very little damage from any starting weapon. Like, you have half a prayer if you have a mace, because, blunt damage does good against skeletons, but other than that, you're not going to be doing much of those damn skellies, and they're bleeding you, and they're spamming you, and they're swarming you, and they respawn, and you learn very quickly, go away. From then, there's another way you can go. You can go down, and that will take you to New Londo. And your first thought might be, oh, there's only a couple hollows here, and there's not much else. Surely this is the way to go. No, you don't get but like 2 of those fucking transient curses that drops in New Londo to face the ghosties at new level, or a new game rather. Those ghosties will one-shot you. They will absolutely wreck you, and you will have no idea what to do. And unless you kill the Seeker, Seward, you're not going to get the key to the seal, and you're not going to be able to progress past there, and you're going to get frustrated yet again. So you do what seems sensible, and you go the third and final route from that starting point at Firelink, and you see a couple basic hollow soldiers, and then you push past there, there's a rat, and then there's a couple more hollow soldiers, and then oh, there's a bonfire. And you're like, all right, I actually found a bonfire. Unlike these other 2 places, this is probably a good place to start. So you go through there, and from there, the first half of Dark Souls 1 is probably the best paced first half of a game I have ever played. Like, you go from fighting hollow soldiers, you get a couple other random elites, like you get some you can find some Black Knights if you start looking around. But from the hollows, you go to the Balder Knights, and then, You got the gargoyle boss, like, and the gargoyles is the true, if you want to call it the true Dark Souls begins here type of experience, then that's pretty much what it is. Because, goddamn, like, if you're new to the game, they will likely destroy. I know some people who will be like, oh, I beat it my first try, it's easy though. But most people are going to get their asses rocked by those gargoyles until you realize you can summon, and you end up summoning Solaire. And thus will begin the start of a beautiful relationship between you and the wonderful, much-loved, sunbathing Solaire of Astora, who simply wanted to find his own son, and we'll get into that later a little bit. But then from there, you got some other places you can go, but the main, not linear, but the story required routes will take you into the forest, which will then take you... I love the forest, by the way. I think some of the best atmosphere and ambient sound work is in the forest, past the Undead Parish, and then especially in the PvP area, Darkroot. The ambiance there is amazing. But, you're not supposed to go there just yet. You're supposed to go south, not south, but down, rather. And you'll find yourself in Blighttown, which will give you a hard time your first time through, but it'll take you to Quelaag, who, amazing chest ahead, let's just say that much. And you'll ring your second bell, and then the cutscene will show you Sen's Fortress. And you don't know where that is, but you likely tried to go there and saw the gate was closed, and you'll remember where that was if you watch the cutscene. It's just visual. It's a way of visually telling you. Show, don't tell. They're showing you what to do, not telling you what to do, which is something that Dark Souls does a lot, with the few exceptions being like item descriptions and stuff. But, Sen's Fortress, again, very well paced. The snake enemies have a lot of poise, but they're very easily parried or backstabbed. And then the real danger lies in all the traps in Sen's Fortress. Learn the timing of the traps, learning when it's safe to move. And then you all culminate in you fighting the Iron Golem, and then when you learn you can actually knock him off if you attack him enough, or summon Iron Tarkus, because let's be honest, he's the real boss of that encounter. And then you don't know what's waiting you after that. You're like, all right, I rang the 2 bells, I'm at the top of this fortress, what the heck could be next? And you get carried to a heavenly city way above you, City of the Gods, or City of the Sky, I think is like the Elvish translation, Anor Londo, which is one of the best, most beautiful areas in the game. Like, it really feels like the game is leading up to you going to Anor Londo. Doesn't seem like there's not a whole lot there at first. A couple giants, you're running around some balconies. I hate that, by the way. Like, pretty much everyone goes through there. Like, yeah, we have nostalgia for it, but we hated that shit. Like, climbing on the balconies. I do not like heights. I am a bit of a scaredy cat, and I do not like heights. So going around those balconies while there's painting guardians rushing you, and then later with the giant, with the silver archers trying to shoot you down, and God forbid you get invaded, when you're there. It's horrendous, but it just feels that much better when you actually conquer it, and when you actually get through to like where the bonfire is, and you're inside the fortress, inside the cathedral, rather, and you don't have to go on any more decorative buttresses. You're just in there, and it's good. Just some staircases and some silver knights, and you're good to go. And then you get to the true make or break experience of Dark Souls that took me... On my first playthrough, I took a break from the game, like, including on time and off time. It probably took me 2 months to defeat the legendary Snorlax and Pikachu, Ornstein and Smo. Don't get me wrong, there's still problems with that fight. The fact that in the remaster, they still haven't fixed Ornstein's, like, random floating. Like, he'll try to charge, but then his AI will bug out and he'll start floating. And then he'll just, like, whoosh, appear, like, right next to you. It needs a little bit of fixing, but whatever. A tiny blemish in an otherwise nearly perfect fight. Perfectly complementary playstyle, and the fact that you can choose which one to kill first, which will determine which one you fight in Phase 2. And it'll determine which soul you drop. So if you want to go a pure strength build and get, Smo's armor from that guy near Firelink, I forget what his name is, Donald of Xena, yeah. You can get his armor from there, or you can trade in his soul to get his massive hammer, or you kill Ornstein and get Ornstein's armor and his awesome spear. So not only is the playstyle, you can choose your own playstyle for the fight, you can choose the rewards you get, essentially. Dark Souls doesn't really tell you that. You kind of figure that out later, but hey, it's the fact that you can do that is pretty cool. It's an incentive to... It gives you a dilemma, like which one do I kill and how do I go about this, and what do I want out of this? It's a little bit of risk reward. And Dark Souls is all about risk and reward. Like Dark Souls 1 isn't very cheap. There's a couple moments here and there that kind of feel like, cheap bastard. But for the most part, Dark Souls 1 is incredibly fair. And just about everything, not everything, but just about everything in Dark Souls 1, if you mess up, is your own personal error. And I can admit that fully. I was an awful player when I first started playing these games. I didn't understand how to let the game teach me. And I did a little series that got almost no views, but I did it. I was a part of another channel with a bunch of friends of mine called the Elite Immortal Gaming Network. It's on a hiatus now, but we had fun doing it. I did a series called Let Dark Souls Teach You, and it was basically me teaching you what to look out for, and like this is the game teaching you how to play it, essentially, by showing you and not necessarily telling you anything. And the fact that Dark Souls, all the Souls games do that, but Dark Souls 1 just does it the best. Like, I can't really comment on Demon's Souls, because I haven't played Demon's Souls, I don't have the PS3. Hopefully there'll be a remaster or something. But I've played Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, and Bloodborne. I've played those to death. I've probably got 2,000 hours, and all those 4 games put together, I've got easily 2,000 hours or more. Definitely more. It's probably unhealthy considering I've only started playing those games in 2016, but what can you do? But yeah, the world and just, granted, the quality of the game does seem to suffer a bit after Anor Londo, because I know the development cycle was a bit rushed by that point. There's less polish, and things feel a little more all over the place after that. But still, each Lord Soul area poses different challenges, different rewards, different play styles, and don't get me wrong, the beta cast is still shit, and pretty much everyone will agree with it. But every place offers something different. Like the Catacombs in Tomb of the Giants, it's fucking dark, but the atmosphere there is amazing. And fighting Nito, he's not a great boss, but he's just really cool, and the atmosphere is just a cool setting. And Izalith, the lava can be a little bit too bright, and it is kind of not the greatest area, and it's got some of the worst bosses in the series in it. But just the idea of being surrounded by lava in a sunken, ruined, ancient chaos city, that's pretty. I don't know, like shit like that's cool to me. Like ancient cities and chaos, I find that kind of stuff cool. Duke's Archives can go fuck itself. Like when you know how to go through it now, you pull a lever, climb one set of stairs, pull another lever, and then you go back over, drop down, and you're pretty much done with the archives. And they just run through the caves and fight Seath. But when you're first figuring out how to go through there, it's the worst area in the game. You hate it. It might look cool, but you hate it. And those crystal guys do crystal damage, and crystal is fucking OP in Dark Souls 1. So it can be very rough. A lot of people usually do that area first because it's pretty much attached to Anor Londo. But my order changes a little bit every time. I usually now I do Catacombs first, and then I do Lost Izalith, then the Duke's Archives, and then I say the 4 Kings for last because they're a damage check. I always use lightning buffs because lightning for the win. But yeah, not really relevant. But there's the world being how it is, and how the game teaches you things, and how you can build your character as well. Like that's another thing. Like the build for, I'll get to Dark Souls 2 and 3 and Bloodborne in a bit, but basically Dark Souls 1, for being the first of the Dark Souls games, had a decent build variety for what was available. Like it was a smaller game technically than the next two. Like the world felt much bigger, and the world felt much more alive, and it just felt like a much more rich experience, more fulfilling experience in my opinion than any of the other games. But despite having less stuff in it than some of the other games, it still felt like you can have a decent variety of how you build your character. I'm talking for PvE. For PvE, you can do almost anything. For PvP, well, giant dads, giant armor, and Mask of the Father, and Chaos Wyander. Yeah, there isn't much of a match for. The only time I've really been able to beat those guys is on my Faith build, where I lull them into a false sense of security. I'll start hurling sunlight spears, which are very easy to dodge, assuming the latency isn't too bad. And then they'll get close to me and think I'm going to be a piece of piss, and then boom, Wrath of the Gods. And then they back up and boom, Wrath of the Gods, It only has 3 charges, so if you can't land all 3 hits and they're not just about dead, you're screwed, essentially. Because as soon as they hit you, you're locked in that forever. But yeah, the PvP and the build variety isn't amazing. It's not amazing in Dark Souls 1. It's not. Like, objectively speaking, it's probably the worst of the 3 Dark Souls games, but it's the one that I enjoy the most. Part of it's nostalgia, and part of it's just how I like to build my characters, I guess. But I would say it's hard to be, it's almost impossible to be objective in any situation, but just going on the matchmaking and the build variety and the gameplay and the speed of everything, I'd say the best to worst PvP would probably go Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, and then Dark Souls 1. But in my personal list of favorites, it probably goes Dark Souls 1, ever so slightly, just barely, not quite, hardly beating Dark Souls 2. And then Dark Souls 3, and then I don't really have any experience in Bloodborne's PvP, so I can't say. Random little divergence into PvP and build variety. But next thing I want to talk about is the music. There's not a lot of ambient music in the game. There's only a few zones in the game that have ambient music, but they're so fitting. Like when you go to the Daughter of Chaos, the music sounds so sad, which fits that area. When you go to Ash Lake, it just fills you with awe and majesty, and holy shit, what am I playing right now? And Firelink Shrine will always be top 5 easily for favorite soundtracks in the game. It's just so warm and safe, and you can't not feel good when you're in Firelink Shrine. It's just so good. I know I'm not really I'm not really doing the best at giving better words and better adjectives, but it's just so good. And the boss music, some of it's forgettable, honestly. A lot of it's actually forgettable, but the ones that aren't are amazing. Ornstein Smo is fantastic. Gwyn is beautiful. Sif is Sif, Everyone loves the Sif soundtrack. It's just epic and beautiful. Artorias is subtle, but again, fitting for, the theme. Calamite is epic. They really do such a good job, and they really capture the feelings and the mood of what you're doing, where you are, who you're fighting, and just what you're up against as a whole. Bloodborne, being a bit of a different take on the Soul series, having that more like Victorian London-esque kind of vibe. It's not the same, but I'm okay with that, because I wouldn't want Dark Souls music in Bloodborne. It wouldn't fit. I like the fact that Bloodborne has Bloodborne music. It's just slightly different in, vibe and theme, and just Ludwig's theme, Maria's theme, Gascoigne's theme, Gehrman's theme, Orphan Akasa's theme, and I think those just happen to be my favorite bosses in the game as well. I think those are my top 5 bosses in Bloodborne, which is pretty funny that, the music happens to line up with that. I'm not saying I decided my boss quality on the music, but I think they knew what they were doing with the music when they were designing the bosses, or vice versa. Let's just put it that way. Yeah, I'm sorry I'm going a little bit all over the place here. I was mostly on Dark Souls 1, then I just kind of hopped to Bloodborne. I'm going to hop back to Dark Souls and go to Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 had a lot of what made Dark Souls 1 Dark Souls 1, but it also was missing a lot. The world didn't feel the same. Granted, Dark Souls 2 had a very troubled development cycle. I don't know what was confirmed, but the general accepted consensus seems to be that the game was kind of scrapped and they switched developers, or not directors rather, halfway through. I think that's kind of what happened. Anyway, very troubled development cycle, so it couldn't have all the same stuff. It couldn't have reached its potential, sadly. But what it did have is it had the best build variety of any game in the series. It had power stancing. It had the biggest variety of armor and weapons. Armor, Fashion Souls. I think Fashion Souls, was a term that was carded in Dark Souls 2, or made big in Dark Souls 2. The variety of gear in there was awesome. Anyone could be happy with what they look like in that game if they got the right gear. The weapon variety was amazing. And if you had a straight sword, it just didn't have the same straight sword moveset like in Dark Souls 1 or 3. There was several different movesets just for straight swords, and then great swords, and then ultra great swords. They really mixed up movesets for the same types of weapons, even, which I thought was awesome. And just really something, something commendable about Dark Souls 2. And I probably have more hours played in Dark Souls 2 than 1. If not, it's very, very close. I hated Dark Souls 2. Anyone who, knew me or a couple years ago when I started playing it for the first time, I hated Dark Souls 2. I thought it was awful. Like, granted, literally half of that is because I didn't understand adaptability. I was in Discord, I was in a chat room in one of our servers, and I was kind of bitching about the game, and my one friend says, hey AJ, where's your ADP at? She's like, she says you want to get to like 25, or so. And I'm like, what's ADP? She says, you haven't leveled ADP yet? I'm like, no. She says, where are you? I'm like, I just killed the Lost Sinner, my first lord. And she says, you went all that way without even touching ADP? I'm like, yeah. She just burst out laughing at me. Because, like, the hitbox problem in Dark Souls 2 is real. Like, it might not be a hitbox thing as much as it is how the game handles animations. But it's also tied to that without ADP, you lose iframes. You gain iframes by leveling adaptability, which I think was an awful idea. I think everyone will admit that. Because Dark Souls 2 had a lot of decent ideas that just weren't executed poorly. ADP was just a bad idea in general. Sorry. I don't think there's any redeeming ADP. But, what can you do? It's not the end of the world either, because it's not like... Because there's a ton of bosses. That's another problem about Dark Souls 2. A lot of people complain about humanoid bosses and, dudes in armor. I don't give a fuck. I actually prefer the dudes in armor, if I'm being honest. I like that there's other stuff in there. There's the rotten, there's blobs, there's a big spider, But there's enough variety for me, but I like dudes in armor. Personally, it's just the fact that there's too many bosses without really an emphasis on each one being interesting. Like, why do we need 2 Rat Pack bosses? Why? It's... Why? Granted, Dark Souls 1 wasn't immune from that. We had like 3 Asylum Demons. Whatever. Dark Souls 3 had a couple throwaways. But... Every game has throwaway bosses, but Dark Souls 2 just had way too many of them. But that's not too bad necessarily, because with all those extra bosses, you can get a lot more souls. And a lot more souls means you can buy a lot more life gems to help you heal, and you can level up more. You can level your stats more. So, in a way, the extra bosses makes you have extra souls and actually helps beef your character up a bit better. So in a way, it's kind of good. But whatever, I'm not going to debate the boss topic to death like everyone else has. That's my 2 cents on it. But yeah, there's a certain thing, there's a certain charm, a certain something. I've yet to really put my finger on it, but there's just something about Dark Souls 2 that just brings me back, every so often. Like, I do a playthrough of the Souls games every few months, because I can't not, I can't stay away for more than a few months from these games. I sometimes skip Bloodborne in that binge because, I don't have a capture card. My PS4 is not hooked up to my PC. I have to go on my couch, and I much rather play games on my PC. But I'm actually playing through Bloodborne right now. I just killed the, not this moment, but I just killed the Shadows of Yharnam. And I ran through the DLC area up until just before Ludwig, so I can get enough material stuff to upgrade my Ludwig's Holy Blade to +7. I got a Boomhammer +6. So... early game cheesy strength build for the win. But anyway, it's kind of all I have to say on Dark Souls 2. It's got some good ideas, some nice charm, but a lot of stuff that takes away from it, and really good matchmaking in PvP. That's a hell of a lot of fun to do to this day. Now, should we go in order and do Bloodborne, or should we stay with the Souls games and do Dark Souls 3 then Bloodborne? I'll do Dark Souls 3. I'll talk about Dark Souls 3. So I actually played Dark Souls 3 before I played Dark Souls 2. Because I tried Dark Souls 2, hated it, skipped it, went to 3. When I saw that Dark Souls 3 had a lot of throwbacks to the, mostly the first game, but a little bit of the second game as well. People say it was just a clone, a remake of the first one with better, graphics. I would say it was more of a reimagining of it. Because, in a way, because the big improvement, is Lost Izalith from the first game was horrendous, and the demon, not the demon ruins, what the hell are they called? The Catacombs of Carthus feel like what the Lost Izalith could have been, so that was pretty cool. The combat was faster, which was really cool for PvE, but for PvP it was just like who can R1 spam the fastest, kind of like Bloodborne. But hey, I'm not complaining. The gameplay, the whole game was kind of sped up It wasn't just the combat. The whole game was sped up, which I liked. It was a lot of fun to play through. The boss quality was a definite improvement. Like Dark Souls 1 had some great bosses and great atmosphere. Like the combat and the gameplay and the bosses were overall better in Dark Souls 3 by a decent margin. I don't really think anyone can deny that. But the world was better in Dark Souls 1. Like I prefer Dark Souls 1 as a whole. It's one of my favorite games of all time, favorite in the series. It had a more fulfilling world. It just felt like more of a journey. Dark Souls 3 felt like a journey, don't get me wrong, because the bosses were harder overall. But then again, you were a bit more prepared because you played the first game, so you at least kind of knew what Souls games were like. But the bosses were a lot harder, and the gameplay was different. It was like, you can go back and forth about like how it was easier but harder, easier but harder. But yeah, I'd say the boss quality overall, it's a very close tie between Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne in terms of overall boss quality. And same thing with music. It's so close between, like, I've played Dark Souls 3 more, and the fact that it's directly tied to the first Dark Souls game in a lot of ways, I think that edges it out over Bloodborne for me overall. But Bloodborne's fucking close there, man. It's less replayable, which means I don't play it as much, which means I don't appreciate it as often. But when I do play it, it's like, whew, we slaying some bitches and hoes now. But yeah, back to Dark Souls 3. It felt like a big love letter. It was a love letter to fans, but at the same time, it was slightly insulting. I wasn't really insulted that much. A lot of people, felt like there was too much stuff that was recycled and rehashed. And I do get where they're coming from. They definitely have a point. But most of the bosses were different, and there were some new areas, and there was some expansion to the lore, which didn't really need expanding. But there was enough new stuff and changes to gameplay, or enhancements to gameplay rather, that made it feel fresh enough for me personally. I'm not the hardest person in the world to please. I can be critical and I critique things, and I can be a bit of an obnoxious know-it-all in all honesty. But that doesn't mean it's super hard to get me to play a game. When you look at a guy who talked nothing but mad shit about Dark Souls 2, and now Dark Souls 2 is one of my favorite games of all time as well, I can change. I can be reasoned with. I'm not completely beyond appreciating what the good that's in front of me. But yeah, just fighting the Soul of Cinder in Dark Souls 3, man. Like before any DLCs, like I played Dark Souls 3 when it was pretty new before the DLCs, and when I first fought Soul of Cinder, man, when that Phase 2 music kicked in, oof, I was shook. I think I died right after because I was like, oh my god, and then I got locked into the Wombo combo that starts off Phase 2. Yeah. That was amazing. And then I learned that there was 4 different endings, which I eventually got all 4, but on subsequent playthroughs, it's kind of like more trouble than it's worth to get like 2 of those. Or 1 of those, rather. The other 3 are just easy. But in the DLC, the first DLC was a little bit again, ups and downs. Like, there was a lack of content for PvE, but it gave you the matchmaking that you should have had in the vanilla game. But you got that with the DLC. You got a slew of PvP options. You got a bunch of new weapons that you can build around. Sister Fried is probably, again, one of my favorite bosses of all time. I hated her. Like, anyone who saw me stream the DLC back in the day when it came out, or a little bit after it came out, I was whacking my controller against my desk. I was fucking pissed. I hated it. I rage. I spent all day on Frida, and I still didn't kill her. Finally, like, I think the next day or two, I finally killed her. I hated her, but then on like 2 or 3 playthroughs later, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna get good. And like, I played the DLC a few times, and I got good, and then I uploaded a 4K video of me not doing amazing, but still beating Frida, and I don't care. I was proud of it. That felt really good to me. The fact that I was able to plow through Phase 1 and 2 like it was piss, after getting wrecked by them, but then, still getting kind of wrecked in Phase 3 because it's hard. It felt good. Like, it felt good, again, like, even though Dark Souls 3 lacked a lot of the charm and just things that made the original game, mean so much to you, it still had big challenges to overcome. Like, people who came from Bloodborne were probably ready for the hard bosses, but me, I just came from Dark Souls 1. I wasn't ready for, Nameless King and Frida. They were rough. Pontiff, took me a while. He didn't take me as long as Frida, but he took me a little while. Abyss Watchers took me a little while my first playthrough, but again, I was still not a great player. I played through Dark Souls 1 once, and I hadn't even got good at it yet. I didn't destroy it, I just beat it. And then I moved on to Dark Souls 3, so I was still a bad player. But now I can run most of those games in my sleep, not because I'm an amazing player, not because the games are, they're easy. I'm just so practiced in the games that, yeah, I'll still die, but they're just not, and any Souls player will vouch for this. You know, you play through them a few times, you're practiced enough in the game where you're just not going to die a lot. And I do like that. The fact that when you first play it, it's, you know, it'll likely destroy you, but then the fact that you play it a few more times, your reward for that is much easier subsequent playthrough, so you can enjoy the environments more. You can stop to read item descriptions, you can stop to smell the flowers and enjoy other side stuff a little bit more, instead of just focusing on getting destroyed, which, you know, I like. And of course, the second DLC, the Ring City, is probably tied for my favorite DLC with the old Hunters from Bloodborne. Again, it's so... Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne for me are so close in terms of which one I prefer. I love all the games very close. Like Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, I like very... not quite equally, but very, 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 very close. And then Dark Souls 1's obviously the first. But, you know, Slave Knight Gale is probably my favorite boss in the entire series. Not that I get the same rush from fighting him anymore, because I fought just about every boss in the series too many times at this point. But Gale is probably my favorite boss ever. I think he's just the best designed and the most fun, and the atmosphere and the story and what's at stake around there is just so cool. And like, you're at the endscape, you're covered, everything's dead and ashen and sand blown and ruined, and it's just nothing but ash and sand and a starry night sky, and it's just the host of the first flame versus, you know, the host of the dark soul of man. You know, who's going to come out on top? You know, and it's like mixing Guts from Berserk, Orphan of Kos from Bloodborne, and Artorias from the first game, and a bunch of other random crap thrown in there. It just makes for an amazing boss. And my reaction to killing that boss was, I was fucking high, dude. Like, I was shouting and cheering and whooping and laughing, and it was so good. I'm glad I caught that on stream. Thank you, Orgoth, for clipping that. But then there was Dark Eater Midir. Probably the hardest boss for me in the Souls Trinity. Frida would be the only one who could even contend with him in terms of difficulty. But that's for a whole slew of different reasons. I hated, again, Midir, I hated him. I thought he was just an awful boss, just unfair. But then again, a few playthroughs later, I realized, I'm like, you know what? He gives you time to attack his head, he gives you time to avoid him. If you learn his tells, you can run away from the AoEs very quickly. You can actually roll into them a second after they land. But after a lot of time learning that fight, you learn. And that, to me, it's funny how in the end of the Soul series is when it's all brought back to the epitome of what makes the Soul series good. And that's learning from your mistakes and giving you a fair challenge. And I think that wrapped up the Soul series in a beautiful way. It really just all made you feel really accomplished and fulfilled. And there are a few games that have ever given me, like, killing a few, like, mythic bosses or heroic progression bosses in World of Warcraft kind of helped me feel that way, but it's just not the same, you know, like it feels good that you can coordinate 20 people in a voice chat to do something hard, but to do something really hard, really, really, really hard by yourself, there's just something about that can't be replicated in very few other games. Like, if you have a game where that works, where that happens for you, all power to you. Do not let me devalue any gaming experience you've had because of my personal biases. But to me, until I play almost every game under the sun and come to a conclusive decision, I don't think I'll be changing my mind that the Soul series will be just the best ever and the most fulfilling. And that ties into Bloodborne as well. I'm going to be wrapping things up here in a minute, but I didn't touch on Bloodborne quite enough. I kind of touched on that as we went, but to kind of give a few more thoughts on Bloodborne, what I like is that there was more focus on the combat itself, less so about having a million different weapons to work around. Like, there was transformation weapons. You would hit R1, L1, L1, R1, L1. You can combo R1s and L1s into different combos of attacks. Then even L2 had its own different attacks. R2, charged R2. You had more combative options and combo options for different weapons. And that's a really cool idea. Like, don't get me wrong, because I like Fashion Souls and I like having a bunch of different weapons and collecting all the different weapons. I love the 1 million weapon approach of the Soul series, but there's definitely room in my heart to appreciate the Bloodborne style of, 1/3 the amount of weapons, but, triple the play style with each weapon. And, the gun parry system is really cool. I think it works really well with the fast combat, and it just feels really, really satisfying when you can pull that off. And the area, again, FromSoft is really good at tuning the first, half or so of the game, or designing it, rather. Like, the Bloodborne areas are probably some of my least favorite areas in the series, because you spend most of your time sprinting through them like a madman. But the first part of the game, Yharnam, Central Yharnam, Old Yharnam, pretty much everywhere around Yharnam is just so good. And then the DLC areas, I think a lot of the other areas leading after Yharnam and excluding the DLC are just okay. Some are just dreadfully boring and easy to get lost in, like the Forbidden Woods. I freaking hate that place. It's so boring and you get lost. I have the worst sense of direction, so that's probably on me. But the atmosphere is still pretty cool because you get a big feeling of dread in a lot of places. Dark, dingy alleys lit only by torches or moonlight. Sometimes even a blood moon. There's beasts and deformed humanoids. The atmosphere is still really good, but the areas themselves I don't think are quite as up to speed, but whatever. The boss quality, like I said, my top 5 bosses in the game, and I don't think very many people will have much of a problem with me saying this, but Gascoigne, Ludwig, Maria, Gehrman, and Orphan are my 5 favorite bosses in Bloodborne. I like some of the other ones, like Abritas is probably like my number 6, and again, her theme is pretty cool. But all the other bosses in Bloodborne are just okay, in my opinion. Again, I could just be a biased Souls boy, just like some people are biased Bloodborne boys, but, the bosses that aren't great are just okay, but the bosses that are good are fucking phenomenal. And just really, really gives you kind of makes you bring a new standard of, what you expect in a gaming experience now. And Bloodborne was probably the hardest. Dark Souls 1 was the hardest, quote unquote, because it was my first game. But if I was to go back and play, well, like I do every few months, you're going to do a playthrough of every game, I'm probably going to die the most in Bloodborne. Maybe Dark Souls 2 is a close second, but it's probably the easiest in terms of design, but due to some gimmicky, gamey, ADP, BS kind of mechanics, you get killed more in Dark Souls 2, spammy enemies, blah, blah, blah. But I do think Bloodborne's the hardest, and it felt the most... When I killed Orphan of Kos, whoo boy. Even Gascoigne, when I first fought Gascoigne, I think it took me 2 hours to kill Gascoigne. The funny thing is that what some people struggle with, other people find piss easy. Gascoigne took me over 2 hours. It took me 4 playthroughs of Bloodborne to die to the Blood-Starved Beast, old Skin Flaps. It took me 4 playthroughs before I died to him once. Gascoigne destroyed me my first and second playthrough. So just to give you an idea. Don't really know why. Maybe it's because its attacks are just quick enough to trip me up, but just slow enough that I parry too soon. I don't know, but just when I beat Gascoigne, that was amazing, and then I beat Britas, and then Gehrman, and then when I got to the DLC, Ludwig took me a long time. Ludwig and Orphan probably took me weeks. Granted, not that I was trying and banging my head against the wall for weeks on end, but on and off I would play, and it was a few weeks before I killed Ludwig. Granted, the first time I fought Ludwig was on New Game Plus. I pussied out of the DLC the first time around, a New Game Plus. I'm like, you know what? Fuck it, I'm going to do the DLC. And yeah, everything was New Game Plus. So I think that's a point in my favor, the fact that my first experience with them was a New Game Plus, where you're getting 1 or 2 shot without even a second thought. But I'm rambling at this point. Bloodborne's a fantastic game. The bosses are amazing. The good bosses are amazing. It's the hardest one in the series. My personal ranking would go Dark Souls 1 at the very top, and then judged based upon first playthrough enjoyment, it would probably go Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, Dark Souls 2. But now that I've played through all of them to death, I'd say Dark Souls 2 and 3 and Bloodborne they're kind of in a trinity of equal love and hate. I like and hate and dislike each one for different reasons, but it probably evens out in the end. And then Dark Souls 1 is just king. It's just king. It's one of the best games out there. But I think I talked about everything I wanted to talk about. These games really just kind of change everyone's gaming experience who plays them, for better or for worse. They make you feel determination, mystery, confusion, majesty, awe, depression, fulfillment, all in the same playthrough. And that's just something that very few games can replicate, in my opinion. Again, I got to play more games, for sure, to really say that. But right now, I think I can confidently say that will be the best series of games I've ever played. And yeah, if you're still listening and you guys feel the same way, definitely let me know in a comment. I love talking Souls and games and stuff with people. So definitely hit me up in the comments and we can talk. And the next couple topics I have in mind are going to be Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Warcraft, and we'll do some other stuff as well. I got some other stuff in my mind. So thanks for listening, and until you see me again, my friends, live well, and may the flames guide thee.